Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the ScruffyMovies podcast. I'm Zach Wallace.
And I'm John Crocker.
Today, we have a very interesting one, a versus fight, which basically the movies themselves were pitched to me as, hey, do you want to go see robots fight giant monsters? And I was like, yeah, of course I do. And of course, that's going to be Pacific Rim. We're talking about both of them today. And Crocker actually just watched them both for the first time pretty recently, didn't you?
I'd seen the original Pacific Rim a while back, but when I went back and rewatched it, I realized that apparently I didn't pay very much attention the first time through. And then I saw Uprising for the very first time just here recently.
Yeah, and I don't know. I know what Crocker thought of the first one, and I've been hyping up Uprising here for probably the past week and a half, so I'm very interested to know what he thought about Uprising. But I'll let you kick us off, Crocker. I know you always got good questions to start with. What's up?
Well, I'll dive right into it here because I know you've been waiting to hear my thoughts on Uprising, and I liked it. There were things I liked about it more than the first movie, and there were things that I didn't quite like as much about it, as perhaps I would have in the first movie. Right off the bat, probably my favorite thing about Uprising was the weapons that they actually held. Yeah. So you had the big orange one. I can't recall that particular javelin, or not javelin. Oh my goodness. I'm going to say javelin and mech suit and so many things today before I say Jaeger. But I can't remember that Jaeger's specific name, but it had the dual katanas. You had one with sort of the big mace, and you eventually see that it becomes a bit of like a ball and chain. And then the electric whip that was sort of pulled right out of the Iron Man universe, for sure. Yeah, but
Flash.
Exactly. And I specifically remember thinking at the end of the first one, when they pulled out the sword, and she was like, oh, we have one weapon left. We have the sword. It's not as maybe flashy as the blaster and powerful as some of the other things, rockets and whatnot. But they end up kicking complete butt with really is what is just a blade. And when I went into the second movie, I was like, oh, well, I hope they bring that back, and I hope we see more cool stuff. Like, what if it actually held a sword? And then, of course, they sort of keep the same sword on Gypsy, but I was fulfilled in seeing that in all of the other ones. And then there were a few things that I did not like about Uprising. I think one of its weaker points, and I don't want to cut too deep into the movie because saying this might sound as if I'm uprooting the entire thing, and I don't want to do that, but the focus on the cadets sort of wasn't as awesome as I thought it could be. And they wound up really kind of doing a badass job and saving the day, but they never really played up to the storyline of the cadets. They were just kind of there to be the group that you threw the young girl into. And then all of a sudden they were just kind of the badasses that were available when needed. And I feel like that might have been sort of a stumbling point. And I also believe that it was way more predictable. Like in the first movie, you were sort of on the edge of your seat, even though you knew what the plan was and what they wanted to do. And you kind of knew how the movie would probably end because the good guys usually win in these types of movies. In Uprising, it was from the very first moment the whole movie started, I was like, oh, well, the little Jaeger's going to definitely come back and save the day, and who of course comes back and saves the day, right? And so I don't know. I loved it. It's a toss up between the first and the second one. It would be really hard for me sitting here right now to pick a favorite because I like them both, and then I had things about them that I didn't like. So there you have it. Well, how was that for a little breakdown?
Yeah, that's pretty good. That when I watched the first one, and like I said, it was pitched to me as, hey, do you want to see robots fight giant monsters? And I was like, yes, of course I do. And so that's kind of what I was expecting. I was like, I went into that movie, and I think I even saw it in IMAX 3D or something because I wanted the full effect of it. I was like, I don't care if it's a good story or not. I just want there to be cool action scenes. As long as they can wrap a story around a bunch of fight scenes of robots fighting monsters, I'm cool. Like that's like, just give me whatever, as long as the action is cool, I'll be satisfied. That's what I'm going in for. And the story actually really surprised me in the first one. It was actually a lot deeper and like more thought out. And the marketing of the movie was, come watch robots fight monsters. But that's not really what the movie's about at all. It was almost as if, where I was like, just make me a story wrapped around these fight scenes. It was almost like they gave me like fight scenes, but wrapped around the story. Like they just interspersed the fight scenes, but then I'd be like, oh, well, go back, like Charlie Day and the doctors and scientists are working on this thing. Go back. I want to see what's happening with them. I don't care about this fight. I've seen this fight. Go back, do this. And so I was actually really surprised by the story in the first one.
Yeah, and I think that's a credit to their marketing department, whoever that may be, where they sort of set expectations, under promise, over deliver, which is exactly what you want to do, especially in today's movie world. The worst thing that can happen is you hype something up and then it doesn't quite hit that bar. Right. And even if it just barely misses, it becomes known as a failure because it did not live up to the hype that was expected. So when they said come out and see giant Jaegers beat up on, monsters and aliens, then I think they 100% fulfilled on that. And then it was just icing on the cake that you actually got to see some character development and some character arcs and sort of that bit of a backstory that I personally think there's all kinds of room to expand upon the backstory and the world in which all of this has taken place. But they gave you enough of that to chew on that you felt like you were actually watching a movie that would be on par with what you would expect from like the first Transformers or something like that, actually having a beefy enough storyline that it's not just a standalone action sequence, action movie, even though it was promised to us that way. So it was a surprise, and it was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, the first Transformers is a good comparison, I think, to the first Pacific Rim, because those were both movies where I had extremely low expectations, and then I just walked out of the theater being like, well, damn, that was pretty good. But for Uprising, and I think this is just kind of catered more towards my personal tastes, I think that sidekicks are infinitely more interesting than the hero. Like, I am way more interested in like Teen Titans led by Robin and all these like smaller minor characters than I am in Batman. And so seeing Pacific Rim, the first one was like the A class, like the star-studded, the guys who have been there like A1, day one, like these are the best soldiers that we have to get in our Jaegers and all this stuff. So in the second one, I really liked that it shifted focus almost to just the doctors, which were like kind of two minor characters in the first one, and then to the son of Idris Elba, who, I mean, Idris Elba was a main character, but he wasn't the main character. So to have his son come back in it as the main character, I thought just played a really interesting role in like how it like shifts our thinking of who we think these people are and what they can do in the Jaegers. It's no longer just like, oh, we'll get these guys in the Jaegers as long as the kaiju aren't that big, they can do it, and I believe in them. It was now like, okay, I don't know if they can do it or not. Like, once they got in there, and then especially when they got attacked, I believe they were at some kind of ceremony or something, and they get attacked, and they were just there to show up. They weren't supposed to fight, and then they ended up having to fight. Was like really surprising to me. So I like the second one more than I like the first one, really. But I think that's just kind of more to my tastes of it, like dives deeper into minor characters and side characters that you don't necessarily expect to be able to save the world, and then it shows you how they can.
Yeah, and they did a great job at maintaining that continuity as well. And we've spoken about this on the podcast before, how if you give us just enough to connect the dots to the other movie and you satisfy, like this obvious that this movie, the second movie, Uprising, takes place in the same world at a finite amount of time in the future from the first movie. Like, we know that, but there have been plenty of movies where things happen in the same universe, and because the characters that we're following aren't connected, it still doesn't feel like the movies are connected. Right. Something like totally the antithesis of that would be like Cloverfield, where you can tell totally different stories and still all feel that continuity. But I feel like they gave us just enough with, you know, it being the son, even though they didn't mention him in the first movie. They sort of gave us just enough of a reason why they may not have mentioned them. They really did trade. And I thought this was interesting how, I can't remember her name, but the co-pilot, the Asian girl from the first movie, traded Mako. Was that her name? Mako?
I think so. Something like that. Yeah.
Mako.
Yeah.
They really like traded one strong Asian female lead character for another. Like just whoop, maybe no one will notice if we do this fast enough. And Mako was in the second movie. In the first like 10 minutes, you see her in a hologram, and then you sort of see her right there before, spoiler alert, she dies. And then it was like, oh, this other strong Asian female that's running a company is going to step right in. But it was enough, and it was like close enough that you kind of let it slide. And I don't know why they did that. Like, it almost felt like the one from the first movie could have easily fulfilled the role of that actress from the second movie. Now, whether or not that was one of those like business decisions where, oh, she wanted more money, so we just gave her 5 minutes of screen time and gave her the boot, or it was one of those things where it was like, no, she actually has to die to give this character enough motivation to then go do the next thing, the brother, you know? So like that also I could sort of justify and see that. But I feel like they fed us just enough and connected just enough of the dots with some of those recurring characters and sort of those references that I didn't feel like it was as lost as it could have been. Because when the movie first started, I was like, wait a second, that's not the same guy, like the main guy, you know, from the first movie. So like, where did he go? And that type of thing. And we already know that Heimdall dies. I can never pronounce his actual name. So I will,
Idris Elba.
or hereafter refer to him as Heimdall. You know, you see where I'm going with that? Like, I think that was something that they avoided. They dodged that bullet very well.
Yeah, I think probably in an early draft of the script, like you said, I think that probably the woman who ran the business that steps in was just his sister. But then either the actress was like, hey, I have a conflicting schedule, I can't be in as much of the movie as I thought, so they had to rewrite it to this other person, or it was like, hey, you know, the main guy, he really needs like something to, he's just supposed to like be good all of a sudden. He needs something to make him want to be good, and they Uncle Bend her. Yes. More or less. They like, he understood he needed to be in a Jaeger, but he couldn't really care less until she died. And then he's like, okay, now I know I have a responsibility. This is what she wanted from me. So they used her as a catalyst for his story. So there's probably a version of the script out there where she makes it and is in like the whole thing. And then probably halfway through rewrites, they were like, hey, he just like becomes good. Should we make him like want to become good or something? Instead of just like, hey, now I'm good.
Yeah, you're good now.
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm just going to be good from now on. Nothing happened. I just, you know, I've been being an ass, and I just think I need to correct it. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. I got my second or third strike or whatever it was. So I guess I'm just going to be good now.
Yeah. He sits everybody down and gives them a speech. He's like, hey, everyone, I'm going to be good now. Thanks. Have a great day.
I do love a scene where he was like, if this were my father, he would probably give you a speech right now. I am not my father. And then it was like, dramatic silence, and then he goes into a really freaking awesome pep talk. It's like, okay, well, you probably could have just, you know, left that first line out, and it might have hit a little bit harder because you leave it to us to realize he is his father's son, you know.
Yeah, that was something I had written down. The speech Idris Elba gives at the end of the first one, and then the speech he gives in the second one are up there with like some of the best action speeches of all time, I would think. Like, they're up there with Independence Day, especially the first movie. I mean, that was an amazing speech he gave.
This is coming from someone who has never seen Braveheart.
I compared it to Independence Day. Hey, don't out me like that on the podcast. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching this week's.
Yes, we are accruing a list of movies for each of us to watch.
Hey, you got more movies on your list than me.
That is very true, by about 100-fold.
Oh, by the way, Just a fun, like, little interesting fact. I went through my entire movie collection yesterday as I was like putting up new movies, and I purged a lot that I just kind of looked at, and I was like, you liked it the first time you watched it, but are you ever going to watch it again? Do you want to guess how many I took out of my collection?
7.
124.
What? You're actually getting rid of it? You don't just have like I own it, but just should never get rid of it for simply owning it. Kind
No,
of like,
there's some that are like that, but they're like Jingle All the Way 2, and the more recent purchase, Benchwarmers 2, Breaking Balls. I'll never get rid of either, but I I don't know if I'm ever going to watch them again.
so do you get rid of all of these that you've purged, or do you just put them in a box to probably go far to the back of the closet?
Well, I think there's a used DVD store in Chattanooga called McKay's that we like to go to all the time. And so I'm going to take them up there and see what I can get, if they'll take any. And then whatever they don't take, I'll just disperse out to people for free.
Well, let me have first dibs.
Yeah, I know. You have first dibs. I gave you Pacific Rim Uprising.
I know. So you mentioned this earlier, and I think this is important not to gloss over. The comparison to Transformers.
Uh-huh.
Now, when I watch this movie, I'm like you. I can watch movies that are similar in genre and give them each their due and not set back and be like, oh, well, I think they ripped too much, or they were just sort of flowing along on the trend of the day, or whatever it may be. But there were some decisions I felt like they made in Pacific Rim specifically because they wanted to differentiate themselves from Transformers. And one of the major sort of, I guess, critiques that I would have, or if I were to do my own, which I know we'll eventually get to at the end of the podcast here with our quick pitch segment, but something that I would change, and that is giving each of the javelins, or each of the Jaegers a bit more personality, because there's so much to go in with there. You know, they all have their own, not only weapons, but number of pilots occasionally. And we learn that Gypsy is analog and nuclear, and the new ones are all fly-by-wire. And they all have different fighting styles, which are heavily dictated by their armament and their armor and things of that nature, their weapons and their armor. And I feel like there's so much more to go in on there, and that they could have actually given the Jaegers themselves a bit more personality, dove into the science and the tech a little bit more. I certainly would have preferred to have seen that. I know that may not be a direct correlation to Transformers, but I feel like they were trying to sort of draw that line and be like, no, these are tools of war. They're more like a tank that you get in and you drive, and it's a pilot's game and not the Jaeger's game, really. And I feel like they sort of missed the boat, with me at least, because that type of backstory and building upon the details of what these are, because there's really only a handful in each of the movies, that would have made me feel much better. And I think they probably did that to specifically be like, no, these aren't Transformers. These are not sentient things. These are giant mech suits that two humans that are in perfect sync with one another, you know, neurally connected, have to pilot, type of thing.
Would you like to have seen them talk?
No, I would not have liked to have seen them talk or anything like that. But just sort of like, you see the one with the katanas fights like more like Asian style, where it's more ninja, sort of samurai based, like sliding around and doing the different actual actions that you would use with a sword. And then you see the ones that the Russian pair drove, that's just like a heavy hitting, slow moving, super heavily armored, you know, type of thing. Like, they didn't really play up to that. I mean, well, that one, as well as the other one that's in the first movie, both got destroyed. The 3-arm one, the what they call it, that the triplets drove, I can't remember what what it was called.
I'm going to be no help with being able to tell you any of the names of the robots.
But it was, I mean, they actually said like, oh, it has 3 arms, so it uses this particular fighting style, and they gave it a name. It was like the tsunami or something like that fighting style.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see that it fights a little bit different because it has 3 arms and it has 3 pilots. I don't know. I feel like there was a lot more they could have done there. And I don't mean giving them like actual voices and that type of thing, but playing up to their strengths and allowing them to use what makes them different from the other suits sort of as being more of a pivotal point.
Yeah, I think probably the main difference between the Jaegers and the Transformers are that the Jaegers just don't talk. I agree that they do each have their own like unique fighting style and their unique look, which I agree with you. I do think they could have played that up more. Like, I think that they could have like delved into the science of it all and like who originally designed these and see like if it was based off of like their cultural upbringing or like their heritage or something like that, or if the government was just like, hey, you know, we're like looking through all the fighting styles that are around for us, and we really think we need this kind of robot. Like, I would really like to see how they came up with the personalities more or less and the fighting styles for each of the robot, other than just like, hey, we got an extra arm. Do you want to make this one have 3 arms? And they're like, yeah, I guess, sure, why not? So I think that would be really interesting too, just to kind of look into the science of it all and how it was created. And I would like to see and this isn't my quick pitch, so we can talk about it now. I would like to see, we got it kind of in the beginning of the first Pacific Rim, but I would really like to see how this all like first came about, and the like creation of the first Jaeger, I think would be a very interesting movie.
Yeah. Where, you know, perhaps all of the other things we've tried have failed very much in the way, you know, you see in a lot of the Godzilla movies, the fighter jets and helicopters and everything, and they're shooting their strongest weapons and it just bounces off, you know. So it's like, oh, we have to let it pick on something its own size. I think that would be great. That's an excellent idea, and it would be a fantastic sort of origin story to all of this, and tell a lot more about where it came from and how people reacted and how we've gotten to where we are in today's world, speaking from these movies.
Yeah, I agree. Well, you've kind of talked about it a little bit, and it kind of rolls into from the personality of the robots. What was your favorite fight out of the whole series so far?
Ooh, favorite fight? That's a hard one.
I'll go. Mine is 100% at the end of Pacific Rim Uprising, where they're fighting like the giant kaiju, because like you said, now they each all have their own weapons, and I thought that just added an extra like oomph, where the first one was just like, and then we're gonna punch him and shoot him. It was like, no, I got like a sword, and you got this, and you got this, and you got this, and I thought that was just really cool to watch. And I really like the way they did it now. And it's also really funny now, they have to kind of, ever since the Man of Steel backlash, movies have to kind of spoon feed you, don't worry, the town's evacuated, before the big fight where we just see buildings get taken down, because they're like, this ain't going to be a Man of Steel. People were mad that Superman and Zod were just fighting all over the city. Our city was evacuated before we started fighting.
Yeah, you know, I think my favorite fight was probably the one where there were the 2 kaiju, and I believe it was right after the EMP took down the Jaeger that was going to be carrying the bombs or whatever, and they're like, okay, well, we have to drop Gypsy in. And then the next scene you see, sort of a little bit after that, is him dragging like a Titanic style ship like it's a baseball bat. And you've got the 2 Jaegers in town, the one that has like the acid breath, and then the other one, and you see him sort of take them both down after the other Jaegers have been disabled. I think that was probably a great fight. And I just love I guess it's a walking tall moment where you sort of get the slow motion, like dragging the bat on the ground, the big stick, you know, and you walk up and just smack right in the face. Like, that was great for me. That was probably my favorite hit. It's either that one where he smacks him with the ship, or the one where he slides underneath him and slices him all the way entwined right through the center of his body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think these movies are really good about, and I don't know, I'm sure they probably did, but I don't know enough about the trivia of these movies to say for certainty. I would be curious to know if they had like a fight choreographer, like a stunt man, be sitting in there with the animators, and he, like, the same as he would do for like a Marvel movie or something, like the same as he would design a Captain America fight scene. He, instead of working with the actors, was just in there with the animators, and he's like, okay, and then the monster's gonna move like this, and then he's gonna do this, and they like design the fight that way. I'm sure it probably wasn't just up to like the script and the animators being like, okay, and this would be a neat fight. I'm sure they probably got somebody in there, because the fights are really good. I mean, if it was people doing it, you'd be like, whoa, how did they do some of that stuff, you know?
Yeah, and that goes back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, where the orange one that carried the katanas looked like a human fighting. Like, it moved like a human. It moved its arms, very quick, fluid motions. It was doing flips and cartwheels and like all kinds of crazy stuff. And then you had the one with the whip that was very much of like a momentum based fighting style, where it would fly, it would have to like sort of fly around, fly into it, grab it with a whip, loop around, actually get like hardcore leverage to actually make anything happen, which is totally a way that you would fight if that was your weapon. And then I sort of see especially the Russian one and the one with the sort of mace and ball and chain were like very traditional mech style movement, where it was like very robotics, like walk forward, walk side to side, heavily armed, and it would just walk up and beat you with what it had. And I sort of see Gypsy as being more of like a boxer almost, where it's like it had quick footwork and it didn't have any like crazy elaborate weapons. This weapons was really what it came to the battle with. And if you let Gypsy in close with you, it was going to use that plasma cannon or that sword to like rip you apart after it was tied up with you, like after, you know what I mean? So like I see the different fighting styles, and it totally makes sense. And when I say what I was saying earlier about the difference in transformers and stuff, like if Gypsy gets hit in the knee, I don't want the suit to lean down and be like, oh, my knee. I don't want it to be like that sentient. But I also don't want there to be a legitimate scene where they're arguing about who drives whose mech suit, because I want there to be that much specialization that you can't just be like, oh, let me drive that one today. Like, like that shouldn't be possible. It should be so complicated, and you would have to be so fluid with it and so well practiced that you can't just get in there and walk away with it like you can, like a Ford Focus.
Yeah, and I mean, and they do kind of do that. Even in the first Pacific Rim, they're like, we got to get this guy back. He's the only one that can pilot Gypsy. Like, he's the only one that knows.
Yes, exactly. It's the Mark III or whatever.
Yeah. Like, and I like that too, because I like that it's not just like, oh, it's just a big suit, anyone can put it on and go. It's like you have to have, especially even like the connection to the other person in it. Like, your brains have to be compatible so that you know what the other person is thinking. So when you go to swing your right arm, they move their left shoulder back. Like, you guys have to move in tandem. So I really like that they make it more personalized like that, and not like, you can't just walk up. You gotta, like, you probably in training go through suit by suit by suit by suit by suit until they either design one for you, because you're such a good trainee, you're such a good cadet, they make you your own, or you fit into one of the chemistries of one of the Jaegers that already exist that need a pilot.
Yeah, totally. And it sort of did also catch me off guard, speaking of sort of that neural net or combination or whatever they referred to it as, where it would, when it was convenient for it to be a pain in the butt and someone had, needed like a hardcore flashback that they couldn't get out of, that happened. And then when it was convenient for them just to lock and load and be off, then that happened. It was like there was never really a deep explanation as to why it affected some people worse than it did others. I mean, obviously, if you have demons or deep thoughts or whatever, but if like Mako in the first one, when she spools up the plasma cannon when she was still in doc or whatever, like we assume she has trained in the neural net many, many, many times over. So just saying that, oh, your first, like getting into this is going to be a doozy. Oh, what's that? What's that sound mean?
That sound means it's halftime.
Oh,
so
all right.
Halftime is the break in the conversation that Crocker and I take just to go over some of the more recent movies we've seen, some of the more recent news to come out, trailers that come out, just kind of to keep this a little more fresh. And also this has been where we've been doing our weekly digital code giveaway. So far, we've given away Thor Ragnarok, Incredibles 2, Coco, and today, kind of speaking to what we're talking about, we're actually going to be giving away the digital code for Pacific Rim Uprising. So if you want to be entered to win that, all you have to do is comment below the keyword robot on the YouTube video you're watching right now, or you can direct message me at ScruffyMovies on Instagram. Just the word robot, you'll be entered to win, and we'll draw your name, and you could win a free digital copy of Pacific Rim Uprising.
So if you haven't seen Pacific Rim Uprising, then we've completely and totally spoiled it for you. But if you have seen it up until this point, you can now own a copy yourself if you win.
Watch like the 1/3 of it we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's for free. Well, I have a lot to go over in halftime, so I'm going to kick it to you first. What do you got?
Okay. Shaft. It's probably the one I'm most excited about. It's probably the smallest release on my list here for today, but it's certainly one that I'm the most pumped to see. And we all know Shaft. We all know who Shaft is, but this particular iteration, they will be bringing back all 3 generations of Shaft into one movie, I believe, at the same time, telling a singular story with 3 individuals. Now, I was a huge fan of Shaft growing up. I know my father was as well, so that's going to be awesome. I would like to get clarification from you because I believe this is what I've read, and I'm sure you'll know the answer, Zach, but this is only going to be in theaters for like one day or one weekend, and then it's going directly to DVD or streaming?
I didn't hear that. I read on Wikipedia that they don't have distribution rights for it anywhere else. So in America, it's going to be just a regular theatrical release. But for the rest of the world, like 2 weeks after its theatrical release in America, it's just going to hit Netflix for the rest of the world.
Okay. Well, maybe that's what I read then, is that it was like, a week or 2 afterwards, then it would be already syndicated out.
Yeah.
And that's what made me believe that. The second thing I have here, which is also going to be freaking awesome, and I had no idea this was actually in the works until I was reading an article earlier this week, but the Twilight Zone reboot with Jordan Peele at the helm has me super pumped.
Yeah, that's one. I watched a few episodes of like the old Twilight Zone, and then I was really into, if you remember, one came on late, like I don't know when it actually like aired new on TV. I watched reruns on the Sci-Fi Channel when I was growing up, but it was like a more recent one. It was like late 90s, early 2000s to mid 2000s. It ran for like 2 or 3 seasons or something like that. I was really into that one.
Yeah, I like the original for sure. That's the one that I would always watch on like TV Land. And then, of course, here recently, we've had Black Mirror, which we've spoken about many times on the podcast, which was sort of a very Twilight Zone-esque show that was certainly more fitted for the current world that we live in and the current struggles and things that we come across every day. So I'm hoping that this new Twilight Zone will be a bit of both of those, like more traditional, just weird you out stories that may not necessarily involve technology, because I believe most all Black Mirror like involves technology, but it would be, they would be remiss not to make that a part of a huge portion of their episodes, just because it is sort of where we live today, and it would speak to the audience more So I am very excited about that. And we've seen Get Out, which was Peele, correct?
Yes.
And he has another one coming. So at least in my mind, he has sort of solidified himself as knowing what he's doing in that genre. And there was enough of just a swift kick in the butt after watching that movie where you're like, dang, like that was actually a really good horror movie. And those don't happen too often. So I'm pumped. I'm excited to see what he's got.
Yeah, I remember seeing there's a podcast I listen to called The Movie Crypt, which is from two filmmakers I really like that are also pretty big in the horror genre, which is Adam Green and Joe Lynch. And Jordan Peele came on before Get Out came out or anything. And I think Get Out had been announced, like he was making a horror movie, but it had not come out yet. And Jordan Peele was on there talking about like, oh yeah, I've always loved horror. Like it's always been my first love. I went into comedy because it was easier than horror. And it was like all this stuff. He's like, I've also always been funny. So I just thought that would be something easy to do until I could like get my horror movie thing figured out. And I was like, man, that Get Out, that's going to be too funny. Like that's going to be a horror comedy and it's for sure. And then just watching it, I was like, whoa, that is not what I was expecting. But yeah, I'm very excited for that. Now, Jordan Peele with Get Out has earned my viewership with whatever he wants to do for the rest of his career. He's earned at least me going like, well, I'll check it out.
Yeah, same here. And then my very last thing on my list is only because we got a bit of an extended trailer here in the past few days. And this we may have actually featured on Halftime before, but that would be Tim Burton's Dumbo. I am in sort of a phase right now where I'm spooling up to go like watch a lot of the remakes of the classics. Like I still haven't seen that Mowgli movie. I still haven't seen a couple of like the Wicked Witch spin-offs from some of the Disney films and whatnot that have come out throughout the years. The live action Jungle Book I have not yet seen either. And then we have Lion King actually hitting theaters at some point in the next year or so. So here soon, I will be treating myself and going back and watching a lot of those, catching up on some that I haven't seen. And I know that Dumbo will have to go on that list. And it's Tim Burton, and so you never know what you're going to get there. So Dumbo, probably one of those few like cartoon childy movies that absolutely has scenes in it that will haunt you when you're a child. So I can only imagine what Tim Burton is going to do when he gets his hands on it.
Yeah, Tim Burton's always been kind of a mixed bag for me ever since Alice in Wonderland came out. I was kind of like, oh, because I feel like he was making Tim Burton movies back in the 80s and 90s because he was just Tim Burton and he was making a movie. Now I feel like he makes a Tim Burton movie because people are like, so you're going to make this look like a Tim Burton movie, right? And he's like, I'm Tim Burton, yeah. And they're like, yeah, but you're going to like make it look like a Tim Burton movie, right? And he's like, what do you, yes, I guess I so I feel like now he's like pressured into it. And I don't feel like it's this I don't blame Tim Burton really for it either. I think it's the studios doing what I just said and are coming to him and being like, you need to make this look like a Tim Burton movie. And he's like, it is a Tim Burton movie. And they're like, yeah, but make it look like one. And I think that it's more the studios than him at this point. So he's kind of a mixed bag for me, depending on studio interference or if like his heart is really in it, I guess is a weird thing to say. But like Dark Shadows that came out in 2014 or 15, I really liked because I felt like his heart was in it. Like he really wanted to make that movie. But then like the same with that comes the Alice in Wonderlands where it's like, oh yeah, you made this too.
Yeah. I mean, I feel you. I don't know. I almost want to say the last Tim Burton movie that I even like, I mean, and it really wasn't even great, but the last one I actually cared about really was Sweeney Todd.
Yeah, I like Sweeney Todd. I will give Sweeney Todd. I like Sweeney Todd.
You know, I mean, obviously the Batmans and whatnot, or he was in charge of those, correct?
Yeah,
like,
Batman and Batman Returns.
Yeah, and then Beetlejuice, Nightmare Before Christmas.
He only came up with the story for Nightmare Before Christmas. He actually had nothing to do with like making of.
And then he was Edward Scissorhands too, right? Which is
Yeah,
the
Edward
best.
Scissorhands. You know what his first movie was?
What's
Pee-wee's
that?
Big Adventure.
What?
Yeah, directed by Tim Burton. That is a Tim Burton movie. So
You
all
know,
the stuff that's like really creepy in that movie, that's Tim Burton.
I feel like he could totally be one of those guys that, like you were saying, just to like get his heart back in it. Like it wouldn't surprise me if he was like, we're just going to do a really like bright, hilarious movie, even though he's never done anything like that. I mean, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was a brighter movie as far as like the look and feel of it. But I would like to see him just completely and totally break away from the stereotypical Tim Burton mold.
I would too, but that's what I was saying. Like, I think the studios are forcing him into it now, which is making the movies come out as like caricatures of his old work. I feel like his heart's not in it anymore.
Well,
Uh,
what's on your halftime?
Yeah, off of the Tim Burton podcast. I just recently got to see the newest Suspiria movie, which just came out. I was super excited to see, but it just didn't come to any theaters around us. It was really good. I really enjoyed the first Suspiria, and I really liked the remake as well. It's a totally different movie, like 100% totally different, but the choices they make in it and the dancing and the music and the acting all flows together really well. And it's the first movie, I always say, it didn't scare me. It's just extremely unnerving. It makes you feel not safe. So it's not scary. It just doesn't make you feel like you're in a normal situation. And the remake did that as well, just in different ways, which I also really enjoyed. One of the trailers that came out this week was the Child's Play remake trailer. And this was a movie I have actually been looking forward to because they got some really good actors in it. Aubrey Plaza, Brian Tyree Henry are in it. And watching the first trailer, I don't know, I just got this, Chucky is like an advanced, like an AI type robot, and it's making me think that it's not going to be like a possessed doll, that it's going to just be like AI gone haywire. And I'm not really in Chucky for that. The whole reason to watch Chucky is his personality. So if his personality is just a robot that's messing up and killing people, I don't know if I'm going to really be that into it. Also, they didn't show Chucky, and I kind of feel like that was a cop-out. I feel like we've waited long enough. They've just been teasing us with like shadow pictures and boxes and stuff, and I felt like, okay, first trailer, they're going to show him. Even if it's just for like a second at the end, they'll show his face. And they didn't do that, and that kind of made me mad too. I felt like they were just copping out and not giving us what we deserved. So, I mean, I'm going to go see it, but I don't know. After the trailer, I got less excited for it. Also, James Cameron, nothing really big in the Terminator world, but James Cameron did release what is the working title currently, so it could change. But for the new Terminator movie that's coming out that he had a hand in, it's called Terminator Dark Fate, is what they are calling it right now as its working title. And I am extremely excited for that. Even after 4 and 5, I am still like, anytime there's something new Terminator, I don't know, that was just one of those first franchises that really like captured like movie magic for me. So it's just one of those things, like I'll follow it to the grave. Any new Terminator movie that comes out, I'm there. And it's just like, it's something that I just get extremely excited for new Terminator stuff. And now it's got Sarah Connor back, Arnold Schwarzenegger's back. It's got the guy who directed the first Deadpool is directing it. James Cameron's back, like executive producing it and overseeing the whole thing. So I'm extremely excited for that. And then in some weird news, and I don't know if you've even heard about this yet or not, Crocker, Warner Brothers just announced a spinoff of Aquaman, but for the trench aspect of Aquaman, which I still don't think you've seen Aquaman, but basically Aquaman and Mera are going deeper into the sea, and there's this part of the ocean that's that belongs to the trench, which is basically just these humanoid type sea monsters who don't speak or anything, at least not that we've seen in Aquaman, and they just start attacking them. They just attack anything that comes into their territory. And that just got its own spinoff. They announced a spinoff, but just featuring the trench, and it'll be like a horror movie with the trench or something like that. but it'll still be in the DC superhero continuity. So I don't know. It could turn out really cool. It just seemed like a weird way to go when all we're saying is like, hey, give us Man of Steel 2 or like a good Batman movie. And they're like, you got a horror movie about sea monsters. And we're like, that's not what we said.
So it's literally just like a random anthology film that really doesn't support any of the main current characters that they are still introducing and trying to build.
Yeah, they said, I mean, the only two that really probably could be in it would be Aquaman and Mira, or someone from like the Aquaman world. And they said no Aquaman characters are going to be appearing in it. It's just about the trench, like a horror movie focused on the trench and the characters, these like sea monsters that lived there.
I mean, this might be, that could be a wise decision for the DC universe, as with some of the recent failures and some of the successes, and with their movies really hitting one of the two poles, nothing really so far has just been a solid, entertaining movie that like fell firmly into that's a great movie, not fantastic, but not terrible. Like so far, it seems like everything's either been terrible or wow, that was really, really good. So maybe this is their attempt to just kind of bolster some numbers and get some things out there and try some stuff. And I don't know. I'll allow it, but I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, that's I'm not disinterested. So when I was talking about the whole thing, I never said the words like disinterested. It just seems like a strange choice to make. But I am a sucker for horror movies, and especially like underwater horror I really like. So, I mean, I'm going to go see it either way. It just seems like a strange choice, but I'm willing to see what they give me. I'm willing to see, like, here's the cast, here's the director, here's the trailer. Now, what do you think? And I'll make my judgments on that. Right now, I'm only saying it just seems like a weird decision to make. But I don't know if it's a good decision or not. Whenever I start seeing like footage and photos and casting announcements coming out, then I'll kind of make my mind up more about that.
Underwater horror movies?
Yeah, like shark movies and stuff.
Okay, shark movies. I gotcha. I was trying to think like I'm getting like Creature from the Black Lagoon, and that's not even underwater ever really in that movie.
Yeah, like Humanoids from the Deep, all the Jaws movies, Deep Blue Sea. There's something, and my dad kind of instilled it in me, but we used to just be watching stuff and people would be out in the water and he'd be like, man, that's scary. And I, as a kid, was like, why is that scary? I love the pool. I love the beach. And he was like, well, you just don't know what's underneath you, but it knows you're above them. And I was like, oh, that is kind of scary, isn't it? Oh, no. And so now I can't get like too deep out in the ocean or anything. It starts freaking me out because I'm like, you don't know what's out there. I mean, kaiju could start popping up out of there. You don't know. You haven't seen it.
So you like movies where the setting is heavily focused on the water, not underwater horror movies.
No, the movies don't have to take place underwater.
Okay, so Pacific Rim would fall into that niche, except it's not really a horror; it's more of an action.
But yes, like the same like themes, yes, of Pacific Rim, yeah, like them coming up from the water and everything, yes.
Okay, what else is on your list of halftime?
That is it. That was everything that I had this week. I had a lot of like weird stuff, a lot of horror movie stuff to get through, but it's going to be an interesting year for horror. We'll see how it ends up.
Well, we took a long time with halftime there. Would it be wise to roll into quick pitch already, or do you have anything else you want to add before we do that?
No, we basically got through everything I had on my original list besides quick pitch. I came into this mostly expecting just to hear what you had to think about Uprising and starting the conversation from there.
Awesome. So is that an affirmative? Roll into quick pitch?
Yeah, let's do quick pitch.
So as per usual, I have like 4 quick pitches and none of them are fully fleshed out, but I have 4 awesome ideas. Which is always sort of the difference in mine and your quick pitches, because you tend to go pretty deep and not so surface level. So, quick pitch number 1. With the guy from It's Always Sunny, I can't remember the name of the character.
Charlie Day.
Charlie Day.
Is his name?
That's his real name. Yeah. So with him playing such a huge role, and first just let me say that he was a bit too much in the first film, but for some reason when he showed up in the second film and he was wearing like gaudy jewelry and big sunglasses and bright colors, I was like, okay, I'm more okay with you being over the top and an asshole just because you're dressing that way. And I don't know why that struck me as strange. How they present him will allow you to absorb him in a better manner. But I say that ultimately, with him being the guy that sort of triggered all the events in the second movie, with him linking up with the kaiju's brain, neural networking, whatever it is they're calling it, my quick pitch is that basically he disseminated that out to other individuals. So yes, in this movie, he was a really smart guy. He was kind of the big bad guy. He was in control of a lot of different things and sort of made a big deal out of himself as far as like being part of the fight and being a pivotal character. So for my movie, I want to sort of bring that down a level where instead of there being one guy, the main guy that initiated the first networking with their brains, perhaps he went to like that crazy church that they glimpsed to in one of the movies and they're like, oh, those people like worship the kaiju. Maybe he went there and he was like, hey, I have a way for you to actually connect and like speak with these people or with these beings, you know, so they would be ripe for the picking. And especially after he actually hooked them up and he could show them that he wasn't lying, like he can actually connect to them. And then after the events in the second movie, that's definitely a non-question. So instead of one big bad guy that connected with all the kaiju, you now see basically thousands of little people that have connected with them. And I feel like that would be more of a almost like a kaiju rebellion, you know, it's like against the little guys versus the little guys with the kaiju versus the government somehow. But I think that you could really go deep on that.
Yeah, almost like a kaiju cult.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure what powers they would have. Second sort of idea here is all based on the ending of that second movie where he says, you know, we're actually going to take the fight to their homeworld or something along those lines, which would mean that, in my opinion, you have to open a breach, which we see the robots or the mech suits do in the second movie. So in theory, they would be able to sort of backward, you know, engineer that and figure out how is it that we can actually open up a breach. So that technology exists. That is in the universe. And to me, that means opening the breach, sending in loads and loads of Jaegers. So this is where sort of my third quick pitch comes into play, which is just solely about what we talked about earlier, where we need a lot more detail, like on the Jaegers, more story on the specs, and or more story just for story's sake. I want to see specialties, difference in the pilots, and things of that nature. But you could literally have an entire storyline about developing all of these new Jaegers that have the one purpose of venturing into another dimension, into their homeworld, and actually blowing all of them up. So that's sort of like two quick pitches at once, because I did combine them. I wanted to have what we talked about earlier, where it's just solely focused on the in-depthness of these giant machines and sort of maybe where they came from and what it takes to build them and design them and all the different ones out there. Like, is there a Jaeger that's just for like medical purposes? Like, do they have medical Jaegers that have all of these tools and equipment and all of that on there? Like, that's the kind of stuff I want it to go into. And then the final and fourth quick pitch here is probably going to be the big one and spawn a lot of the conversation, because it's really not even my quick pitch. And that is the hopeful Monsterverse Godzilla King Kong kaiju crossover.
How dare you?
Bam. There we go. All out on the table.
How dare you? That is my quick pitch, and you know it. Okay, so I really like the the movie of the Jaegers going into the breach, because I think you can also have a very interesting subplot of that movie of, now that all of the Jaegers are in the breach, what happens if the breach cracks a little more than they had intended and all these kaiju come to Earth? There's no Jaegers to fight them. So what do the people back on Earth have to do to defeat these Jaegers? At the same time, the entire force of Jaegers are in the kaiju's dimension. I think that a really interesting movie can come from that. But yes, like Crocker said, I was talking to him last week, and my pitch, because it fits in so well together, and they're all owned by the same company, which is Legendary Pictures, and then at a bigger aspect, Warner Brothers. I want to see Pacific Rim fight Godzilla and King Kong. We already know that the new Godzilla and King Kong exist in the same universe because of the forthcoming Godzilla versus Kong movie that we're getting. I believe very easily, and it's always been my thought, but a Hollywood writer could probably come up with something better than what I'm thinking of now. But we know that Pacific Rim takes place in the future, and so far in the Godzilla and King Kong movies have taken place in present day or just a little behind present day. So I think maybe at the end of the Godzilla versus Kong movie, they get frozen in ice, or just something simple like that. They take each other down in the Arctic. They just fall deep into the ocean. Everyone thinks they're dead. It's over with. We've done it, whatever. But they're actually frozen down there. And then I think maybe a breach opens up next to them in the Arctic. They're frozen in the ocean. The breach cracks the ice. We see them start to move again. They resume their fight in the future, thinking that they're both still the enemy, even though we've seen, as in the King Kong and Godzilla movies, they're both not really the enemy. They're more anti-hero fighting these things to protect the rest of the world. So I'm sure there's going to be a big bad in the Godzilla versus Kong movie that they end up fighting. But if that doesn't happen and they believe that they're both still the bad guys, they resume their fight in the Pacific Rim world. People are like, oh man, kaiju just popped up. They're unlike anything we've ever seen before. They don't look like kaiju. And it's Godzilla and King Kong. And I think that over the course of the movie, we see the Jaegers start to fight them, but then they all kind of realize they're on the same side almost. And I think the perfect way to do that is just by having kaiju attack all of them at once. And they all start fighting the kaiju instead of each other. And they all kind of have that moment of like, oh, this is what's going on. Like, we're not all on different sides. We all need to fight these kaiju. And the one scene I have in my mind is that it's raining and you see like a lightning crack and you see just a bunch of kaiju out in the middle of the ocean, standing in the ocean, and they're like running towards something that we haven't seen yet. And then the camera reverses, another lightning crack, and you see the main Jaeger, whoever that ends up being, standing, and next to him on the left and the right are Godzilla and King Kong, and then an army of Jaegers behind them. And then the person gives some kind of line of, this is it, now it's go time, or something like that. King Kong starts beating his chest, Godzilla roars, and then you just get the one glimpse of them like getting to each other, the kaiju and Jaegers and King Kong and Godzilla. You just get the tiny glimpse of them hitting each other, and then that's when the trailer ends. And then it comes up Pacific Rim versus Godzilla versus King Kong, or whatever they end up calling it. But that is my quick pitch. I would love to see the MonsterVerse cross over with Pacific Rim because they fit so well together already.
Yeah, I mean, it would be cool, like, even in the movie coming out here soon, where, because Godzilla and King Kong and everything is in the past and Pacific Rim is in the future, where maybe they just mention at some point in passing when, you know, they're trying to fight Godzilla or King Kong or Mothra, whoever it ends up being that they're trying to fight at that moment, that there might be something called like the Jaeger Initiative, where we're going to try and build these suits to take on these otherworldly threats that are sort of new and we've never seen before. And then maybe that gets shelved because they end up saving the day and the movie plays out as intended. But then sort of eventually it's like, oh, well, that was sort of the birth of the Jaeger system, or of the Jaeger, I don't even know what they call it, the Jaeger Initiative came because actually of Godzilla and King Kong and Mothra and everyone else. and we're just bringing that out of the mothballs and sort of doubling down on that when all the kaiju show up, type of thing. Like, oh, this technology has at least been conceived of before. Mm-hmm. So when it says it took us 14 months to build the first Jaegers, they didn't have to start with development. They just had to get the blueprints off the shelf and say, let's modify this to fight a kaiju and not a giant monkey or a giant moth.
Right. And I mean, I think that they can also kind of go into, these are kaiju, these are like ancient kaiju who, because of the time they've just spent away from their home and on Earth, they've become, like, through generations and generations and generations of having children in all these secret places that we didn't know that's where they were. Like, Kong was on Skull Island. Who's to say his, like, great grandparents didn't look a lot more like the kaiju that we know from Pacific Rim? Like, these are just ancient kaiju that rose from the very first breach that kind of colonized America, and now generations have passed where they've changed, they've evolved to fit more of their environment than what they previously would have needed to fit.
Well, they say in Pacific Rim, and I can't remember which movie, that, but definitely the first one, some look like a fish, some look like a shark, some look like a crab, so it would only make sense that you have one looks like a giant gorilla, and one looks like a giant moth, one looks like a giant lizard, or it could even be a dinosaur if we're going back that far, so it's like, it's there. They could play with it. They take the shape of creatures we know.
Oh,
so
100%. And I mean, it's owned by the same studio. They'd be stupid not to. Like, they fit so well together. It's like, as soon as New Line Cinema, I believe, who always had the rights to Nightmare on Elm Street, bought the rights to Jason Voorhees, immediately they were like, okay, a Freddy versus Jason movie is coming out. Because, like, why would you not do that? It makes so much sense to do that. And Pacific Rim and Godzilla and King Kong make even more sense than Freddy and Jason. Freddy and Jason made sense to fight because, like, oh, they're both horror movie slashers. Let's have them fight. But this is legitimately like the Jaegers from Pacific Rim fight giant monsters. Godzilla and King Kong are both giant monsters. Let's have them fight.
It's a match made in heaven. And I mean, they already admitted that it exists in the same universe, right? They're calling it the Monsterverse or something like that.
Godzilla and King Kong are existing within the Monsterverse right now. So far, Pacific Rim has not been added to that.
They should get on that.
They should, and make a big crossover movie.
Awesome.
All right, everybody. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of the Scruffy Movies podcast. Thank you for listening. Once again, if you would like to win a free digital copy of the movie we were talking about today, Pacific Rim Uprising, all you got to do is comment on the YouTube video below the code word robot, or direct message me on Instagram at ScruffyMovies. Again, the code word is robot. If you either comment it below or direct message me on Instagram, you'll be entered to win an absolutely free digital copy of Pacific Rim Uprising. Please follow us on Instagram at ScruffyMovies.
And Crocalicious.
Thank you all for listening. We got a weird episode coming up next week, but it's one I'm actually looking forward to, and you'll know what I'm talking about when it gets here. But thank you for listening, and we all hope you have a great week.
Bye.